Good evening and welcome to an emergency edition of Tisky Sour. And what an emergency! Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has announced, and got the Queen to agree to prorogue Parliament. It will be closed down for 5 weeks, opening again on the 14th of October for a Queen's speech. There'll be only a week for them to meet before it is suspended. There have been outcries from across the political spectrum, but mainly from the opposition and some Conservative MPs, saying that this is a coup. We will be discussing tonight whether it is, what it means in terms of the Brexit process and how Labour should respond. I'm joined by the one, the only, Aaron Bastani.
How you doing, Michael? You good?
I'm very well. Have you been glued to your laptop screen today?
I have actually, because I've been on holiday for 2 weeks? And so I've just come back to normality.
Did you get back today?
Yesterday.
Oh,
so
good timing.
It's good time. It's great timing because not really much has happened in the last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And now this is manic. So I'm very happy I'm not sort of following up on a beach because obviously beaches are places you're meant to relax on. So, yeah.
Is this a coup? First question.
No.
No? Why not?
Well, a coup would imply that there is an undermining of the usual protocol, that the modus operandi of government is being subverted in an undemocratic fashion. What we have to understand is actually Britain isn't a democracy. Therefore, in many ways...
That's a bit of an ultra-left position, isn't it?
In many
to
ways,
say it's not a coup because we don't even live in a democracy. We do live in a democracy.
No, in many ways it's not. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you a very substantive example. Italy had a constitutional crisis after the general election in terms of determining who the prime minister would be, etc. Who was the linchpin in making a solution happen there? It was the president. And the Italian president, in many ways, actually is very ceremonial. It feels a very similar role to the monarch. But there's far more checks and balances in a moment of political crisis, and it's far more immersed in a democratic sort of chain of command than what we have in Britain. So, no, I mean, it's a very fair thing to say that Britain's not a democracy. A nation, Northern Ireland's not had an active parliament for more than 2 years. Our second chamber isn't elected. Our head of state isn't elected. We have a prime minister who's not been elected. And people say, well, the Prime Minister's not elected, we elect MPs. But what we're seeing today is that so much power informally is invested in the executive, particularly the Prime Minister, that argument doesn't really hold any water. So I do think there's a profound expression here of actually how undemocratic the British system is. I don't think it's a coup. I just think it's the strongest expression yet of the Westminster model being completely, just in utter freefall and not being fit for purpose in the 21st century.
I mean, it's also an expression of Boris Johnson and his administration feeling they can get away with anything, right? So they're playing absolutely hardball. And, I mean, in a way, they are running roughshod over what are our democratic traditions, whether or not it's a coup. So normally you accept that any important business that the government does has to be by consent of the House of Commons. They are going to be excluded from decision-making power and from scrutinising the government for a very crucial 5-week period, which is much longer than it's ever been before. So we are in, extraordinary times, and you can see why this is seen as being counter to the principles of representative democracy. So normally you have the MPs there to scrutinise the Prime Minister. He is going to suspend Parliament because he thinks they won't like what he wants to do.
Yeah.
Not a coup, though.
No, we agree it's not a coup. We agree it's not a coup. But also Britain is an exceptionally strange country when it comes to these things constitutionally. Mm-hmm. If Britain was applying to join the European Union today, it would really struggle to meet the entry criteria. What are called what are they called? I wrote about it earlier on. The something criteria, Copenhagen criteria, I think, from 1993, which is basically setting out a set of criteria by which new member states, particularly from Central and Eastern Europe, will be judged. You had to have a separation between judiciary and the legislature. Britain didn't have that, by the way, at the time. At that time, the highest court of appeal in Britain was the House of Lords. Now it's been changed post-Blair. You had to have elected holders of public office in terms of the legislature. Britain today doesn't have that. Britain, I believe, has... I think it's the largest body of unelected legislators outside of China. Might be wrong. And it's also, by the way, the only legislature...
Oh, because there's so many of them, because they just ennoble anyone who works
for the Prime
700
Minister
people when they resign.
Now, yeah. And then it's the only legislature in the world other than Iran which has a certain number set aside for religious figures. So, this is really a very strange country. And there's an explanation for this actually in left theory, which is called the Nairn-Anderson thesis. We've talked about it on the show before, which is that Britain, because it industrialises so early, you have a strange amalgamation of the feudal character of the previous pre-bourgeois British state with the bourgeois industrial capitalist state. And this fusion really happens around the 1830s with the repeal of the Corn Laws, the Great Reform Act, and there's an alliance there between the feudal noblesse oblige and the sort of bourgeois, upwardly mobile middle class to lock out Chartism, trade unionism, working class people. And so that's a really good explanation of why we have such a dysfunctional and seemingly underdeveloped democracy when we're told Britain's the mother of parliaments. Because the reality is we never had that liberal revolutionary moment. Whether, you can look at the United States, 1770s, you can look at France, which has its first revolutionary moment, obviously 1789, which is repeated, 1848, Paris Commune, etc., has a number of republics. You can look at a bunch of places, Italy after the Second World War. We never had that moment in this country where we said, right, let's get it all down on paper, have a codified constitution, proper separation of powers. And my suspicion is these kinds of scenarios will only get worse until we have that.
Yeah, and do you think that we should be talking about that now in terms of a new constitution?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly not the main. It's not the main question.
Yeah.
We have a broken economic model. We're facing no deal Brexit, but I think it is important to state clearly that the dysfunctional response of our political elite to what's going on isn't just because they're bad people. Many of them are, but it's also because we don't really have a polity that's fit to deal with the problems of the 21st century, or even really to grapple with democratic decision making. There's a guy called Walter Bagott who now has a column at The Economist named after him.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about the rough genius of the English constitution. Of course, at that time, late 19th century, English and British were interchangeable terms. And it doesn't look like genius anymore. It looks like a really backwards, dysfunctional way of doing politics.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because it's definitely dysfunctional. I think anyone looking at British politics over the last 3 years would say it's dysfunctional. But there's another question, which is it democratic? So in a way, what we're seeing here is a tension between two types of democracy, representative democracy and direct democracy. And obviously it's not formalised in our system. Well, it is formalised in our system, which one of those takes precedent, which is parliamentary democracy. But in terms of what has democratic legitimacy, that's what's being disputed at this point. And what Boris Johnson is doing, potentially intelligently, potentially it's going to backfire, and that's going to have a lot to do with how much the opposition can mobilise what he has done against him. The judgment he's made is that doing something which looks kind of naughty vis-a-vis Parliament, vis-a-vis the MPs, is going to be seen as legitimate by a broad enough section of society because he's doing it in order to deliver what he says is a democratic mandate.
Interpretation matters, right? But also so do facts. That's like saying, well, when Mussolini did the march on Rome,
what I'm saying is that there are two genuine sources of legitimacy. One is representative democracy and one is direct democracy.
I entirely agree.
So you can't say it's a fact that what he has done is undemocratic. I don't think you can. I think there's very strong argument that it is, but I think that's going to be a political dispute, and you have that political argument.
No, I would say that there's a number of pillars to the English Constitution. Forgive me again, Brits. Well,
but then you're saying it's unconstitutional, which is a legal question, right?
No.
And then the courts will decide that.
So, parliamentary sovereignty, constitutional monarchy, rule of law. Those are meant to be the sort of the three pillars, right? Mm-hmm. Parliamentary sovereignty would imply the legislature, i.e. the House of Commons and the House of Lords, but primarily the House of Commons is in the ascendant when it comes to decision making. The executive is meant to stem from the legislature, but what we've seen over the last couple of decades really is actually what Lord Hailsham called an elective dictatorship, which is to say, because the apparatus we've inherited from the 19th century works in such a way that if you command a majority in Parliament, you can do pretty much anything. In 1945, that meant Clement Attlee could transform the welfare state, create it in a meaningful sense. For Margaret Thatcher, it meant neoliberalism. For Tony Blair, it meant doing a bunch of stuff, right? So, and Lord Hailsham was right. They have an elective dictatorship there. But the point was that executive was meant to be restrained by a set of protocol and convention. And also it was meant to be restrained by a monarch who doesn't exercise formal political power, but tacitly says, if you can't, and we had a conversation about this before the show, what they're meant to say is, if you can't command a majority in the Commons, you have to have fresh elections. That is why we had two general elections in 1974, We haven't had any general elections since 2017, I would argue, because Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of the opposition. In normal times, the monarch would have said, rather than saying to Boris Johnson, will you please form a government, they would have said, you can't command a majority in the Commons, your predecessor has lost more votes than her 4 predecessors put together. Clearly the big issue of the day is a split right down the middle in society at large. Go back to the country.
But then you've got a problem, because you're doing now what the ultra-Remainers were doing today on Twitter, which is trying to ask the Queen to save you.
No,
right?
I'm not saying that.
So the reason we haven't had a general election, there is a mechanism to bring about a general election. What you have to do is the MPs, the democratically elected representatives in Parliament, have to either call and win a vote of no confidence, or 2/3 of them have to vote to bring about a general election. And that hasn't happened. So the fact that the government hasn't collapsed is because that hasn't happened. It's not because the Queen hasn't said you don't have enough support.
No, I'm not saying the Queen, I want a woke Queen to slay Boris Johnson. That's not what I'm saying. You're saying, how is it undemocratic? I'm saying, within the rules by which the Westminster model is meant to function, within its own internal calculus, the executive, i.e. the government, isn't meant to have this much power. It isn't meant to have this much power.
It doesn't have that. It has. So you could say the last 3 years is when the executive has had the least power it's had in our lifetime.
Because it's not had a majority. Yeah. And that's why now the executive is trying to short circuit that by literally suspending Parliament, which is why I'm saying it's undemocratic.
But the MPs still have sovereignty in a sense, because they're going to go back for a week, and if they want, they can trigger a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson and win it and go back to the electorate.
That's a good counter argument. Yeah.
Yeah. But do you think they're going to do that?
Well, we'll find out. I mean, the thing is, people like Dominic Grieve, Justine Greening, these people, if they're really serious about stopping No Deal, what today has done is accelerated the whole conversation. This is not about us, following all the protocol and trying every avenue. There is one way of stopping No Deal. That's by following a motion of no confidence in the government, and that's by explicitly saying, clearly the next Prime Minister has to be the leader of the opposition. That's Jeremy Corbyn. They have to now accept that's the only way of stopping No Deal. And I agree with you. I think it probably wouldn't pass because these people aren't serious about stopping No Deal. They care more about saving their backsides and keeping their jobs and not losing the Tory whip or being deselected by local members than stopping No Deal, despite everything they've said. There are some exceptions, of course, but will it be the 30-odd names you need? Probably not.
So there are a number of risks that Boris Johnson has taken with this move. So one is that the courts will strike it down, or that the MPs will deliver a vote of no confidence in the first week they come back. There are some theories that that's what he actually wants, and what he's trying to do is trigger a people versus parliament election. The other risk is that this plays badly with the public. So this is seen as him overplaying his hand and him acting in a sort of irresponsible and undemocratic way. I mean, it seems like that is the conclusion people are coming to. So, Gary, I've just WhatsApped you a poll that was released today.
This was the YouGov one, right?
Yes. So on Twitter this morning, I was saying that potentially this prorogation isn't going to be seen as outrageous as many people, Remainers or Labour Party members, think it will be, because just as this seems a bit democratically odd, the idea of having a second referendum when you've just had a referendum before you implement the result, that's also odd. And so what you've got is two quite odd democratic moves, which people will basically just view through whichever lens is their chosen Brexit one, right? No, but I mean, that's what I thought. But it actually seems like this is quite unpopular throughout society. So in terms of the question was from YouGov, is it acceptable for the government to stop Parliament meeting between mid-September and mid-October? 47% of the public think that's not acceptable, and only 27% think it is acceptable. And Leavers, 51% think it is acceptable, but there's still 25% of people who voted Leave and still think that this was a dodgy move.
But who thinks, I mean, because as I recall, I think it was 44% thought it was unacceptable. So it's not a majority who think it's unacceptable.
47% think it's unacceptable, but there's only 27% that think it is acceptable. So that's still quite a big, gap.
Yeah, no, that still would, I would have thought that would be it. Most people would say it's not right, but, do we have the groundswell of anger? You would want 60-70% of people saying this is unacceptable. Do we have that? Probably not. What I think may change over the next few days, we've had Ruth Davidson stay, the Scottish Tory leader. She's resigned. That could begin to change. That could begin to change. I was actually surprised how low it was for prorogation, like you are. But you would hope it still would go a bit higher still.
I mean, I'm in a way surprised that don't knows is that low. Because, I mean, I often think with all these constitutional questions, like I'm basically learning these through this Brexit process because sometimes I have to host a podcast. So do you know what I mean?
Sometimes.
So the idea that the general public is aware of all these constitutional nuances seems a bit implausible to me. I mean, polling sometimes suggests that more pay attention to it than potentially I originally thought. But ultimately, what I think is going to happen is this is going to be seen through the Leave Remain lens. Yes, you've seen 25% of Leavers have said they think this is unacceptable, but that doesn't necessarily mean they think it's so unacceptable they wouldn't support Boris Johnson. So I think he's made the judgment that the biggest danger, the biggest threat to the Conservative Party at this point is if they don't deliver Brexit, and they should do it by any means necessary. I think what's intelligent in terms of what they've done, that doesn't mean it's right in any way whatsoever, is they saw that what they want to do is they want to kill time. They saw that when Theresa May was trying to kill time, buy time, run down the clock, she did that in the context of a parliament who was really intent on stalling her capacity to leave the European Union. And all those defeats, that huge series of defeats, phenomenally large defeats, because it brought together a constituency who were actually quite disparate in terms of what they positively wanted, was incredibly draining to the energy that her administration had. And I think the Tory party now have obviously made the judgment that they don't want that to happen, so they prefer to take this massive risk at the beginning and say, look, we're not going to do this whole parliament thing. We're just going to suspend the thing and hope for the best. Do you think that's going to backfire?
Yeah, it's a big risk, but I think it's probably, from their perspective, it's the right thing to do. And I think ultimately, Boris Johnson doesn't want no deal. He doesn't want to take Britain out, come hell or high water on the 31st of October. It's about shitting up enough Labour backbenchers to get effectively what Theresa May submitted already 3 times through. You need about 30 Labour MPs to get it through. And I think we're now in the process where people recognise the scale of the crisis is so big that maybe 30 would defy the whip. I don't see that happening on the Labour side, just because they would be generally.
Why don't you think they're going to get no deal? Because I mean, the way this has been interpreted by most people is that this is suspending Parliament because Parliament don't want no deal. They want no deal. The government wants no deal, so they have to get rid of the MPs. I think
their primary objective with this strategy is to get a deal through on Labour votes, because they've fostered a sense of general political crisis. If that doesn't happen, they'll still have a great get out of jail card, which is, we did this, it was stopped by this alliance of people, Labour, Lib Dems, Plaid, SNP, and we had a general election, and they've undermined the will of the people, and then after that they would oversee some form of no deal. So it's plausible, but basically, and I think it's a pretty smart way of going about things. There's a plan A, B, and C, which none of those lead to the annihilation of the Conservative Party, which is what Theresa May was doing. They got 9% in the European elections.
So I kind of disagree with that, because I think one of them could do. So the reason I thought potentially a while ago that prorogation to achieve no deal might be unlikely, and that would have been a longer prorogation, so over the 31st of October, so to the 1st, is that would put so much responsibility on that government for no deal. And I think at the point that no deal happens, one thing we know, the sky is not going to fall in, but there is going to be economic damage. And I think if there is economic damage in terms of a no deal, you are going to want to have something to fall back on, so that not all of the responsibility is in you. If they say we're suspending parliamentary democracy so we can do what we think is right, which is a no deal Brexit, and then no deal Brexit brings about a recession, that's going to be very electorally damaging to them, which is why you have to have it soon, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, no. So basically, if there was to be a no deal, October 31st, you'd call a general election early November. And I presume that's what they would do.
And then have it in December.
Yeah, you'd call it in November. You'd literally call it like 3rd or 5th November.
They'd have to call it very quickly.
You wouldn't do no deal and then say, like you say, take the hit. Then the economy contracts by 0.5%. Etc. You wouldn't do. Of course, you wouldn't do that. You would announce a bunch of good. You would make sure it's managed relatively effectively. You'd inject a bunch of stimulus into the economy through this Queen's Speech via what we're going to see with Sajid Javid over the next few weeks. And it would, like I say, the sky wouldn't fall in. That would be your argument, and they might not form a government off it. But again, that's their third strategy. That's their C strategy, and it's a lot better than where they were headed a few months ago. So there is a method to the madness.
What do you think the Labour Party should do? So you don't think what Boris Johnson has done is a coup, but there are obviously many people in society who do, and the Labour Party might think it's strategically or they might believe it, or they might think it's strategically useful to be leading the people who think this is a coup. So what do you think the Labour Party should be screaming at this point in time?
Well, if someone wants to call it a coup, that's fine. I don't think it's a coup. I've seen, for instance, Owen talk about, our ancestors. Well, my ancestors certainly didn't die for British democracy. Actually, they were rather undermined by the British state, but that's another conversation. Our ancestors died for British democracy, civil rights. Some people's did, right? The Second World War and so on. And we need to defend that. And I actually think that's a bad frame, because we absolutely should not be defending the Westminster system. We should not be, and that's not an ultra-left thing.
I think that is a bit ultra-left.
Why is it ultra-left?
Well, so
This is business as usual for the Westminster system confronted with a major crisis. This is not an outlandish way for the Westminster system to behave. So, and I think you need to be clear with people about that, because if we're going to come out of this crisis at the other end with a socialist government, big economic program, you also need to have a sort of response which says, we kind of don't want this to happen again. That includes, how do you deal with referenda? Are referenda binding? Let's have a constitutional procedure about dealing with referenda, like they do in Switzerland. So I don't think you could use that defence of the status quo. I think you need to say propositionally, look, we can't do this again. We need to write this shit down. We had an uncodified constitution for 400 years. So I prefer the Bernie Sanders line, we need a political and economic revolution. That's what I would say, rather than defending something, because there's an absence of truth content there for me.
I mean, it's interesting, that idea of absence of truth content, and I think this often in terms of, I think because so many people who are really engaged in this Brexit debate and who are engaged in these constitutional debates actually come to politics with different motivations, with different fundamental motivations, and they have to be a lot more annoyed about something that they don't actually mind that much about. So if you look at it from the other perspective, right? So there are so many people who've been saying a second referendum would destroy democracy. That they use exactly the same framing. This is a country where
faith in democracy is not the same thing.
Well, no, I think they said this is a country where we had hard-won voting rights, and you can't have a government, you can't have a political establishment which thinks you can ignore some votes. I think that's specifically what James Cleverly is saying. So what they're doing, and I don't know if he believes that, I think he might think on one level that ultimately, look, if it was me on the other side, I'd say potentially let's have a second referendum. I don't think he, on a philosophical level, thinks that overturning second referendums is the worst thing in the world, but he's saying it for his political, or to support his political project. He's making it out like it is the worst thing in the world.
I think that's certainly not good, is it? It's certainly not good to have Parliament pass the necessary legislation for a referendum.
Yeah, well, both are,
the Greens,
both
the Lib Dems, Labour saying, let's have an in-out referendum, and then the in-out referendum happens. Certain thing, there's a certain outcome, and everybody's, oops, let's have another one. It's certainly not good. The question is, that's a bad thing. Is no deal worse? Of course it is.
Yeah.
So that'd be my logic. And also, look, we had the exact same thing with regards to the Lisbon Treaty. France voted against the Lisbon Treaty, Ireland. Yeah, and there was a temporary, and I would say there was a loss of faith in the political process temporarily. But, people, not forever. Fuck, we had Iraq in this country with the Iraq War. People now have faith again in the Labour Party. Yeah, it took 25 years, a complete change of management. Not 25 years even, when I talk about 16 years. Well, Corbyn came in 12 years later. It took a complete change of management. But, I think it probably be a temporary loss of confidence in the political process. Not a good thing, right? Really bad thing. But like I said, I think no deal is worse. So get over it.
Do you think the better framing for the Labour Party at this point is to say that democracy has been undermined, or that there's been a coup, or to just say, look, we just want Remain now?
Because no.
You don't think the Labour Party should be the party of Remain, do you?
I'm not saying that. You're saying democracy.
I kind of think that. So I basically think that what you've got two driving issues at the moment, which is in the public. So I think within the Labour Party, you actually got lots of people who want to implement, like I do, you want to implement some kind of radical social democracy. And you think that to achieve that, it's necessary to, not necessarily disingenuously, because you're saying to be able to implement that, we have to be driving the cause of people who voted Remain, because that's part of our coalition. And sometimes you have to change your platform and your priorities according to what your coalition wants. That's one of the ways that partisan democracy works, right? But I think that ultimately winning the next election will be down to whether or not Labour can win over the pro-Remain anti-austerity coalition, which I think is reasonably large. And to do that, they should just say, look, we're done with all of this. We're done with all these parliamentary shenanigans. We will win an election. We will have a second referendum. We will campaign for Remain. And we'll also put up against Remain May's deal. We didn't really like it, but it is Brexit. And we don't have any time to go and renegotiate a different deal. And then we'll get on with the things that you really care about, which is rebuilding Britain.
Yeah, but the thing is, what that does is it maintains the incubus of Euroscepticism had its scale in this country, European elections. So, I mean, you're not really eliminating the problem. All that would mean is that UKIP would just, or the Brexit Party, would just continue to do very well in European elections. They would continue to be a thorn. From a Labour perspective, maybe that's not a bad thing, because Euroscepticism is a conservative
Well, also, you
problem.
can't. I think the whole problem here was that, and it's exactly the same with the Scottish referendum. I mean, I'm ambivalent about Scottish independence. I don't really mind. But the idea was you can have one political event, which is a final reckoning, which ends the subject. And I think any solution to Brexit...
That's not what happened. Yeah.
No, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I'm saying if the Labour Party say, look, we want to remain at this point, let's just have enough referendum, we'll stay in the EU, or potentially May's deal will win and the sky won't fall in, even though it's not ideal. That's why we're going to campaign for Remain. And that obviously won't end the issue, but it will end the issue to the extent that the Labour government at that point can then spend 4 years rebuilding Britain, hopefully winning back a bunch of the people who were disenfranchised from politics when they voted leave and didn't actually leave the European Union.
Yeah, I think that's plausible.
And I suppose sometimes I just find it frustrating that I feel like there's so many angles, or so often in politics we're having an argument which isn't actually what we're arguing about. And I feel like in terms of the second referendum being an outrage to democracy and this proroguing of Parliament for 5 weeks being a coup, it's sort of people are framing their own real priority through a different narrative. And I don't know if they'd be better off just keeping with the Remain Leave thing. Just say, look.
See, I disagree. I think
you disagree.
It's great the Remain Leave thing, or like the alt Remain thing. Like, there's been a big scission between like the alt Remain people, or the sort of Remain ultras, as I call them, and Corbynites over, Brexit. There has. No deal, stopping no deal, what it does is it allows to bring that coalition together. But what it's also done today with, the Queen and so on, is it's highlighted the fact that to an extent Brexit reflects a crisis of our governing class generally, but specifically the Conservative Party, but they've been the party of government for 150 years. They've been the overseers, the administrators of British capitalism. And there is a fracturing in the Conservative Party between Farageism and what you might say is like the sort of patrician, market-friendly, internationalist, capitalist class headed by people like Michael Heseltine, etc. And those two people have governed together really effectively since the 1950s. They're clearly falling apart. And the point is the ruling class here is divided on the matter. And I think FBPEers, these people, are beginning to understand those contradictions, and also, the apparatus of the British state isn't going to help them. They've got, the Queen will step in. There are these weird people that somehow have this parasocial relationship with the Queen, like she's their friend and they know what she's really thinking. The Queen will do, will do whatever's necessary to maintain the survival of the House of Windsor, just as her ancestors did. And so I think, we could foster a broader debate here about democracy, which would be an outgrowth of how we ended up here. A lot of people accept we're in a big political crisis. Why? I think most FBPers for a long time, it's the bad people over there. I think they'll begin to have a bit more of a structural understanding of things now with the proroguing business.
Do you think there is a stop no deal coalition? Because that's what I potentially think is a mistake, right? So I potentially think that there are people who haven't wanted to necessarily commit to one particular European Union, or one particular Brexit outcome, as it were. So I've tried to construct this imaginary thing, which is a no deal or a stop no deal coalition. And I don't think it exists. I think mainly what you've got is some Remainers. I think everyone in the stop no deal coalition is basically a Remainer, or someone who just wants to extend. Who just wants to put off the decision-making process.
Well, that's what's happened because things are polarised. But I think rhetorically, most Conservative MPs...
In 2017, you had a soft Brexit coalition, but that's gone. Which is why now I think we just say, look, we just Remain now. We just Remain.
Rhetorically, Boris Johnson would say he's not a no... rhetorically, most Tories would say, we don't want no deal, but if we have to, we'll do it. Rhetorically, that's what they would say. So I'm not quite sure if that's true. Again, it hinges on, how many Lib Dem MPs, Change UK people, Tory rebels, quote unquote, are willing to do it. That's what it boils down to. We know Labour bring 250 people to this. We know that. So it's all these other ingredients. Will they do it? No. So to that extent, I agree with you. There's not a stop no deal coalition. Because the thing is, we're only going to care about this when the medicines stop being delivered, when we start having power cuts.
Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, there'll be disruption, clearly. How bad will it be is the question. There clearly will be disruptions to things like medicines, or there'll be bottlenecks of supply of some things. Of course there will be.
I'm going to take some sort of questions mid-show, I think. But first of all, you're watching Novara Media. You're watching an emergency episode of Tisky Sour. As you know, this show is only possible because of your kind support. There will be plenty of demand, I think, for emergency shows in the next 3 months. It's going to be an unprecedented time in British politics. And the more money we have, the more often we can do these, basically. So if you're already a supporter, please go. If you're already a supporter, thank you very much. If you are not already a supporter, please go to support.novaramedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. As ever, please like this video. It means it appears in more people's feeds. Please share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, and keep your comments coming. I'm going to take a few questions in a moment. But first of all, Gary, can we go to this article by Alex Wickham on page 2 of the notes? Because it goes through what are some absolutely wild ideas that Number 10 are currently having about ways that they can stop MPs having their say and stopping or resisting a no-deal Brexit. So I think at the top of the article, you sort of have a list of all of them, but I just picked out what my favourite ones were. So one quite wild proposal. This isn't the wild one. So one key impact of proroguing Parliament is the effect on existing bills. So a motion to carry over a bill to the next session has to be moved by ministers. Therefore, if backbench bill to stop Johnson from proroguing or mandating him to extend Article 50 has not passed Parliament by September the 9th, it would be killed. So that's the idea that the reason he wants to prorogue instead of just having an ordinary recess is that in that first week back where MPs are there, if they try and start legislating to suspend Parliament instead of having a no deal, they have to do it by the 9th of September or it's dead and they have to start all over again on the 17th of October. And as we know, he's going to try and fill many of those parliamentary days with budgets or other things which demand debates. Well, it's the Queen's Speech debate, isn't it? So the Queen's Speech, you have to have 5 days of debate.
Am I right in thinking that proroguing means that MPs literally aren't allowed on the parliamentary estate? And for recess they are, which is a big distinction, right?
Well, the big distinction between...
So people can't even go to their offices. They couldn't potentially hold meetings. It'd be quite
I don't know, but
a useful tool in that respect.
What I do know is that the most important distinction between recess, so there was going to be a parliamentary recess for conferences, and instead of a parliamentary recess, we're going to have the proroguing of Parliament. And the importance there is MPs, they have to vote for the recess. So they could have, and they were planning to, vote to cancel the recess over that conference period. And what Boris Johnson has done is he's removed that opportunity because proroguing is not in their power. It's in the power of the Queen.
Yeah.
So because that's happened, MPs can do absolutely nothing to
the
stop
Queen
it.
prorogues
I don't know if they can
elections,
walk. I don't know if they can walk on the estate or not.
They can't. No, proroguing means you can't go to Parliament, which is quite if you're trying to literally stop people from talking to each other. Quite useful.
The wildest proposal though, which would have a very small side benefit for us all. So an amendment tabled by Rebel-in-Chief Grieve theoretically forces Parliament to sit if the government attempts to force through no deal via prorogation. So this was an amendment which was passed before the summer. But the amendment states that Parliament would not have to sit on a bank holiday. So parliamentary expert Joe Armitage says the Banking and Financial Dealings Act 1971 stipulates that the government could ask the Queen to create a new bank holiday or even a local bank holiday in an unpopulated area of the UK. Oh, actually, that would lose us the side benefit, wouldn't it? But that would thereby prevent Parliament from sitting. This proposal was looked at by Downing Street.
No.
Yeah, so they might potentially introduce a bunch of...
That'd be look, we're going to solve the productivity crisis. We're going to make you, that's it. 10 new bank holidays.
It's going to start looking pretty ridiculous, isn't it? Let's take a couple of questions.
But we've got 1,700 people watching. Thank you so much. If you're enjoying the show, why not share it? Twitter, Facebook. Hit that like button, the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. If you want to help Novara Media grow in the coming months, because we are, it seems, about to have a constitutional crisis. Getting even worse. So help us do that. Michael seems, you seem deep in thought there. Was there a good question you want?
I'm looking at deep questions. I was also just considering how much sweat was rolling down my face.
You're not sweating actually. The makeup's working.
I didn't have any makeup today. I did have some yesterday because Gary was looking after me. Right. Marie Clark Price asks, how did the left avoid the no coup movement becoming the pro-EU ultra-remain centrist campaign?
Say that again.
How did the left avoid the no coup movement becoming a pro-EU ultra-remain centrist campaign?
Is it a no coup movement now?
So the no coup movement, say the demonstration that was at Parliament Square today.
Is that a movement now? Look, let's be real. And I actually think it will get a lot bigger. I'm not denigrating it. But let's be real. 2,000 people demonstrating against the Boris Johnson government in the country's largest Remain city isn't that big a deal. Jeremy Corbyn at the drop of a hat, when there was the coup, got 10,000 people demonstrating in Westminster. And that was just for a single party with 500,000 members. It wasn't a national issue. So let's take it a day at a time. That said, I do think there will be more demonstrations, probably nationwide. I imagine they'll be quite large, at which point it's a very salient question. What is important, though, is today the politicians speaking at that demonstration, and let's take it at face value, and let's say this will grow, but I don't think it necessarily will, but let's say it will grow. They weren't, what's important, it wasn't just Joe Swinson and Caroline Lucas. You had Keir Starmer there, John McDonnell, Diane Abbott. That's really important that there's left leadership within this thing. I don't think it should be Jeremy Corbyn, because he's got to be the Prime Minister for everyone. But I think you should absolutely have involvement from leading left figures, yeah. It's great that Owen Jones was there as well. I personally would be very reticent to go to a demonstration with people flying EU flags. I find it weird. But clearly the left has to have some involvement with it. If it doesn't, then it will become precisely what this woman's saying. What's her name? Rosa?
No, that was just a random name you came up with. Marie-Claire Price.
Marie-Claire, sorry.
Oh, you're looking at other names in the comments, right? I see. I thought you just came up with that.
Sorry, Marie-Claire.
I mean, my answer to that would be maybe we don't need to worry that much. I mean, I kind of have the Paul Mason line at this point, which is, look, we just need a coalition. I mean, it just so happens that in the next general election, people like Alistair Campbell are going to be part of our electoral coalition. I mean, if the left shows some leadership, I think at this point in time, and this was not my opinion in 2017 or 2018, it's quite recent that this has become my opinion, that the only way that the Labour Party is going to win the next general election is if they take some leadership in this Remain movement, even if it isn't, the passion of some of the leading figures in the Labour Party to say that, look, our constituency requires us to, and we will respond to the demands of our constituency, which is for us to become the Remain Party. And I think you're going to have leading figures in the Labour Party leading these movements. I think it's almost a cop-out, actually, when many people on the left say the problem with the Remain campaign was that it was led by centrists. I mean, it was led by centrists because the left didn't get involved.
That's what Chesham says, right?
In
the article,
it's true.
He wrote the article for us yesterday.
But I also think I think it was reasonable for the left to not get involved. But I really don't think it was Alistair Campbell that was the problem. I mean, the people who Alistair Campbell really switches off, the people who really hate Alistair Campbell are the people who are in the Corbyn constituency who are going to vote Labour anyway.
That's just not true.
How many people? How widespread do you think is?
That's like Tony Blair.
How many people know who Alistair Campbell is?
Tony Blair is hated by people on the radical left. He's hated by people like Peter Oborne, Peter Hitchens. He's hated by Daily Mail readers. The idea that Tony Blair and that coterie around him, Mandelson, Alistair Campbell, and that genre of politics generally, the idea is just the left disliking them. It's categorically untrue.
I just don't think the problem is the involvement of people. So I don't think there are many elections which are lost because someone else got involved. If Bernie Sanders is the candidate in the Democratic presidential elections, he's not going to lose any votes because Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden support him.
I would never share. Honestly, put my hand on my heart, and I'm saying to you right now, I would never share a platform, as in a speaking platform, with Alistair Campbell. Wouldn't do it. It would literally have to be something so unbelievable because the man oversaw entrance into a war which killed so many people. It would have to be something.
But that's not the reason that the Remain campaign. That's not.
You're talking about building alliances.
That's not the reason for Labour's woes. I think you probably do have to build that alliance in this time. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn needs to.
Alistair Campbell, who is the guy? You make him sound like some big. Who is the guy? It's just some random guy who's relevant 20 years ago.
No, that's
who literally his only currency in the media is attacking Jeremy Corbyn. Why? You don't need to work with the guy.
No, I don't think you need to work with the guy. I just don't think his presence is the problem. So if I was Jeremy Corbyn, I'd say I don't need Alistair Campbell to be in my campaign, and I think they were right to kick him out of the Labour Party. They should have kicked him out a long time ago. But I think
there's a quote here. Owen Walker. Campbell is a monster. Yes, he's a fucking monster.
He is a monster. Yes.
What they did was monstrous.
But the job of the left isn't to keep out monsters from your coalition. The job of the left is to make your coalition bigger.
What coalition? The Lib Dems are a party. People vote for them. They have activists.
And we need a lot of their fucking voters. We need shed loads of their voters.
So if you say Joe Swinson, I say, well, yeah, because people go out and vote for Lib Dem councillors. They canvass. That's a real living thing, right? Mm-hmm. Alistair Campbell is a media confection right now. He's not been relevant for 15 years. He's pivoted to this stuff around mental health, right? Because he wants to stay relevant, and it's a great topic to talk about. It's much needed topic to talk about. He has personal experience. Look, and that's great. And when he writes this, he wrote a great piece recently. I think it was the Sunday Times. I read it. Great. In terms of the future, the political direction of this country, not interested. I'm not
saying you need him to lead the campaign. What I'm saying is, I think there are many people over the last 2 years on the left who have said the reason the Remain campaign has flopped is because it's full of centrists, and I don't really think that's true. I
Hasn't-
mean, also, I don't think the
hasn't-
Remain campaign has flopped. It's been
hasn't
quite
flopped.
successful.
Well, no, it's flopped. It's flopped. It's been very successful at making the idea of a second referendum salient. Has it persuaded anyone who previously voted to leave to now vote Remain? No. They would reply, that wasn't what we wanted. We wanted to get the idea of a second referendum on the agenda. So, it depends how we're judging success.
I mean, they didn't really need to persuade people. I mean,
Well, they do, because they want to win the referendum,
well,
don't they?
the idea for the Remainers is basically you have it was a very lackadaisical campaign in 2016, partly because no one was particularly passionate about the EU on the Remain side. People were only passionate about leaving. I think this time around you would have a lot of passion on the Remain side, and it probably would win. I mean, I wouldn't bet huge amounts of money on it, but I think it probably would.
I just don't think that. I just don't. How can you say it would win?
I said it probably would win.
It would be the margin of error. I agree with it. It could win. The idea that and that's the point. And I'm saying that with that in that manner, that discourteous manner to you, because that's the point. Calling for the second referendum and then saying, oh, actually, the idea of persuading anybody to vote, differently to how they did the first time, that's kind of irrelevant. That's why I think it is strategically inept. That's why I think people like Alistair Campbell are a variable, because people look at that and they go, who the fuck is, I don't like this guy. I don't want to be part of what
I just don't think I don't think many people had that thought. I think most people just don't give a shit about that.
About Alistair Campbell?
Yeah, I don't think anyone sees a campaign and thinks, oh, Alistair Campbell's involved, so I'm not going to vote Remain.
I think they do.
Okay, we'll have to find some polling on this.
Look at the polling on Tom Watson. Look at the polling around who should be the next Labour leader.
Yeah, Labour members hate him.
Hold on. And then who's bottom? Tom Watson and Jess Phillips. Now, if you were just reading the media, you would never think that in a million years. And I think there's 20-30% of the country, left, right, centre, whatever. Not centre. Left, right, who just loathe anything to do with Tony Blair. It's not 60-70%, it's 20-30%. And when you're looking at a referendum which lost 52-48, that matters. He turns off and alienates far more people than he brings to the party. Jeremy Corbyn alienates people. Many people dislike Jeremy Corbyn. I would argue more like him in terms of how do you build the coalition to win a second referendum, right? You want Jeremy Corbyn involved.
He's going to be a more important player.
Yes, but he's decisive. He's divisive. Good. He's going to divide opinion, and hopefully you win a majority over to your side of the argument. I don't think that's the case with Alistair Campbell. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need Alistair Campbell in the campaign, but I think if he's involved, that won't be why it loses. Okay, right. Crazy Hobo asks, thoughts on Ruth Davidson standing down, implications for SNP. Oh, sorry, I've read that with the wrong. Thoughts on Ruth Davidson standing down, implications for the SNP regarding a general election and Labour's prospects. I think that's potentially quite damaging for the Conservative Party. They have 13 MPs in Scotland. Yeah. And I think their coalition in Scotland kind of did rely on the fact that they had a liberal face of, because the base of their support there is unionism and not being as obnoxious as the English Tories. And Ruth Davidson was the face of that, the face of sort of reasonable centrist unionism. Yeah. And now she's gone. I think they probably will struggle. The Lib Dems might mop that up. Yeah.
Not the SNP, but
I mean, to be honest, this might be a bigger
or Labour. Yeah,
this might be a bigger problem for Boris Johnson than anything else, which is how many of his MPs and how many sort of leaders of the centrist movement in his party abandon him and take people away with them to the Lib Dems or whatever.
Well, there's just not many of them. I mean, obviously, the thing in Scotland is that there's a sort of a national cluster of them, right? But in England, that's not really. Look at Amber Rudd.
Yeah, look at Amber Rudd, who I think in the campaign or in the leadership campaign said that this is not something. I think we aren't the Stuarts, she said when prorogation came up, and now it's happened. And
but it's also it's like you said, Scotland's massive, right? Because we've talked about can you form a government, etc. Without winning those seats in Scotland in 2017. There is no second May administration. We don't have this argument. We probably have a Labour-led coalition of some kind. We would have a Labour-led coalition because they would have gone to other parties. So, yeah, it's massive. It can't be understated. Also means, really profound things for the union, because she attracted, like I said, those soft Tories who the Lib Dems, they're gold dust in England. And if a lot of those votes now go to the Lib Dems, to Labour, the Tories have problems.
Oh, this is a good question. Darren Alevi. Wouldn't it be better for Corbyn, electorally speaking, that Bojo gets Brexit done and over with, and then Corbyn can speak about class politics again?
Can you repeat that?
Wouldn't it be better for Corbyn, electorally speaking, that Boris Johnson, gets Brexit done and over with, gets it over and done with, and then Corbyn can speak about class politics again?
Well, I mean, if that was the case, then yes, but it's not going to get over and done with because it's going to be with us for a long time. And then, this is just the withdrawal agreement. And then we have to have the sort of political agreement afterwards. We have to have the trade agreements. We have to have the trade agreement with the US. So no, I mean, if only. I think Paul Mason has a good argument around this. The left, to often the strength of Corbynism has been a sort of default economism. It's about the economy, it's about lived experience, it's about people's engagement with work and wages and public services. All true, but that doesn't then mean that you avoid big political questions. Like Kurdish independence or the European Union question or the Scottish independence question. Sometimes also you need to have a socialist argument and a response to these things. So, I think, but life isn't that black and white, sadly.
Yeah,
he would certainly benefit from it.
Who? Corbyn?
If the debate purely went back to...
Oh, if the debate purely went back to that. Yeah,
of course
exactly.
he would.
So if the debate purely went back to that would be good for Corbyn, but it won't do.
Yeah.
Right? And I suppose, the Conservative... In a way, the debate does bring some votes to Labour as well, because there are some people who are more Remain than they are Socialist and will vote Labour for that particular reason. In a more general response to that question, I think that was Plan A. So I think Plan A for the Labour Party was to say, let's get Brexit over and done with, and then we can move on. I think because it's taken so bloody long, that's no longer an option. So if Brexit does happen on the 31st of October, a real danger to Labour's electoral chances in the future, which will still be strong, is that basically Brexit Party voters will have largely got what they want and they'll go back to the Conservative Party. But the Lib Dems will take a let's rejoin the EU straight away, and they'll retain a sort of like 10-15% rump of the electorate who are now passionately pro-European and don't want to vote for anyone who doesn't have a position like that. So that could potentially divide the Liberal Socialist coalition, as it were.
Hey, look, that's no bad
Another
thing.
variable is how many sort of Labour leavers you get back, but there aren't that many of them now.
I'm perfectly happy to have a two-party system in this country if it means you've got the Lib Dems versus Labour. Right? If that's how things break, if you do have a collapse of effectively like we said, mainstream Conservatism...
But why would you have a collapse? In the scenario I gave, that you didn't have a collapse of Conservatism, because they basically mop up the Leave vote.
I'm saying longer term. But the question is, you would clearly have a right-wing entity of some kind, whether it's the Brexit Party, the Conservative Party, or both of them. Would they, looking at the demographics of it, looking at the long-term state of play, looking at how no deal will unfold, I don't think. I think there'll be two big poles of attraction in British politics over the next 10 years. I think one will be sort of that liberal European reformism. One will be more about sort of internationalist socialism with the Corbyn agenda. That's not the whole debate. I would say it's probably about 60% of the debate. The question is, like you say, from a Labour perspective, can you get enough of it to vote Labour in a general election and to have a majority in the Commons?
This is a good question. Interlinked 3 times. Do you think Brexit will cause Britain to create a second republic like France changing its republics with crises? It would be our first republic, wouldn't it?
Well, that's true. We had a republic. We had a protectorate.
Oh yeah, it would be the
second republic.
It would be a second republic, but the first one in 400 years.
I quite like that.
What do you think it will happen? Do you think this is going to be a boost to the Republican movement?
I think the debate around republicanism is going to be far more compelling than people probably realise. When Queen Elizabeth dies, I think it'll be a very, very big debate. Now, I don't think it's going to all of a sudden, 60% of the public want a republic. Right now, the numbers are very low, right? 15, 20%. You can imagine that doubling. And I think it could become, a minor political debate. It wouldn't be like Brexit or austerity, but I think it could become a really live debate. And that's a problem for the royals, because if from generation to generation you're inheriting a very strong Republican tradition, which would be something I hope we can do over the next 10, 20 years, that's it's bad news for them. And my suspicion is that republicanism would scale in a time of crisis. Would it scale sufficiently this time round? Possibly not. I mean, look at what happened in Spain, for instance. You have the crisis there. Juan Carlos II, was it? The former king?
I can't remember which one, what their names were. Who had to resign and got replaced by a younger one, and then the popularity has gone up again.
Yeah, because he was seen killing, hunting animals and so on. But that also took place in the context of, massive economic stagnation in Spain, a return of regionalism, nationalism, etc.
Well, we've got a political crisis, and Prince Andrew is potentially involved in the Epstein affair. Well, he's best mate.
So you could have something. So you could have something like that, where you have all of a sudden the royals become very unpopular. Would it be enough to get rid of them? Not this time, I imagine. We could have something like Spain, though. If we can revive the idea of mainstream Republican politics in this country, fantastic.
Right, I'm just looking for some more. Balanced Chanding says balanced debate. What's Mason, Watson, Campbell, all to the gulag? That's quite extreme.
No, Paul Mason's a good guy.
Yeah, I agree.
I disagree with some of the things he says, but you're going to disagree with people. That's life.
Pick out some questions as well, Aaron.
Can I? Okay.
Yeah, or put them in cap locks, and then
Wasn't the thing to put them next to a rocket?
Yeah, I don't
emoji?
know why Gary chose the rocket, to be honest.
Mason Watson Campbell to the gulag. That's good. Look, everybody gets to enjoy the fruits of socialism, even the bad people. And Paul Mason's certainly not bad.
Oh, this is good. Roma Cabanas. What do you think we the people can do about this mess? Is protest enough?
Is protest enough? I'm going to write a book about revolution. Will it be my next book? Probably not. How do you change things? How do things change? So protest isn't enough, no. But it's definitely
I thought you were going to expand a little more on that. Have you got a book plan?
Well, no, definitely a start. So I buy that idea. David Harvey talks about that footnote in Marx, how you understand how history flows through mental conceptions, social relations, relations to nature, technology and production, right? And these all influence one another. So how do they influence one another? Steam engine is created, catalyzes the Industrial Revolution. That creates new forms of social relation, new forms of production, factory, steamboats, creates new relationships to nature. Equally, new ideas, new mental conceptions can give rise to new technologies. Clearly, vegetarianism, veganism in the last 10 years catalysed the market for synthetic meat, right? And so what I would say is, and this is a really strange answer to a question about protest, but the idea of escaping capitalism, escaping neoliberalism, means we need to understand that we have to have revolution in each of these spheres. Social relations, relations to nature, technology, mental conceptions, daily life. So, what would relations to nature be? Vegetarianism. And vegetarianism or veganism, I'm never going to be vegan, sadly. Gary is going to hate me for it. I could probably be a vegetarian. And people have said, well, how is that different to ditching plastic straws? Great question. Well, I think it's such a powerful shift in your relationship to nature, not eating other animals. I think it's a really, really important thing. Not just from the perspective of actually being a vegetarian and the help it does to combating climate crisis and mitigating suffering, but just that changed disposition to nature is a really big shift. And so I would say you need to be seeking out those kinds of shifts right across the spectrum. And the failure historically of left politics is to privilege one of these spheres, right? Anarchists privilege social relations. Yes, you should be using the right pronouns for people. Yes, you should be nice to people. Yes, if you're a man and you're speaking too much, shut up. Yeah, all that stuff. In isolation, subtracted from class consciousness, subtracted from class struggle, technology, etc. It's nothing. Technological determinists do the same. Marxist-Leninists do the same. Deep Greens do the same. You need to have an expanded, maximalist understanding of how to change society.
There's a few questions in here that I think are all related in terms of how I want to answer them, which is partly related to that protest one, but we've also got Nathan Hardisti, who says, what should Labour's pitch be in the forthcoming general election? And Joseph O says, what can the grassroots do? And I think the answer to both of those is basically, I think we've got to look at what our coalition is going to be, and it's going to be kind of Romani socialist types. And the way you win a general election is not doing the whole, just we're anti-Boris Johnson, not just doing, we're just anti-no deal. And I don't think you even need to give that positive a visual of the EU, to be honest, because I just don't think it's particularly persuasive. I think you say we're gonna have a referendum. Hopefully, we'll remain in the European Union, and then after that, we'll implement an incredibly inspiring, positive socialist vision. So it's not just getting angry at various things that we perceive as being outrageous, but saying that we have a positive vision that's going to get us out of this miserable mess that is British politics at the moment. And I think that could be quite persuasive, and I think that is going to be a message that's not going to just come from the top of the party, but which will come through the grassroots. And I think given that there's 500,000 people in the Labour Party, there's going to be a lot of goddamn perspective for that to happen again. Once we've got the Brexit question right, a simple short answer, I think would help.
Do you think the position should be revoke, as Zoe Williams said? I thought that was an interesting article in yesterday's Guardian.
No, I don't think the position should be revoked, because I think it's a bit offensive, really. So I think the position should be there will be a second referendum. We're going to put May's deal against Remain, and we'll back Remain. And if May's deal goes through, fine, we'll leave the European Union. And if people say, well, that's undemocratic, what about the option of no deal? We can say, look, any Brexit fulfills the result of the referendum. If you want a Brexit that's harder than May's deal, vote for a different party. That's the nature of democracy. No, you can't offer something that pleases everyone. If you have any kind of Brexit, you have fulfilled the result. You have fulfilled the referendum.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think actually once you have a general election and Labour actually talking in those terms, I think actually the whole Brexit Party spiel would not collapse pretty quickly, but you can deflate it pretty quickly. You can deflate it. There's clearly going to be a hardcore of 15-20% who won't buy it, but you can definitely deflate it. You can definitely take the momentum away from them.
This is a question which is very much related. JG, what's your take on love socialism, hate Brexit group within Labour?
Michael, you go first.
Well, my answer would be on a personal level. I think a lot of them are really great MPs. So you've got people like Clive Lewis, Marsha de Cordova, Lloyd Russell Moyle, who's been on the show a lot.
Paul Sweeney.
It's always very good. Paul Sweeney's been on as well.
He's good. He's Republican.
In terms of how I relate to them, I mean, I think they often come from it with a very positive, not so much an uncritical vision of the EU, but it's very much about the fact that they see the EU as an internationalist project. And I come from it more from the angle of, look, I'm not that passionate about the European Union. I also don't think like Lexit's a particularly good idea. So I'm coming for Brexit I'm coming for Remain because that's the best way to build a Labour coalition. And I think their priorities are different. They genuinely think that the EU is a somewhat progressive force. But I think that's fine. I think you need people who are putting the EU first. And then you need a bunch of people within the Labour coalition who are sort of like going along for the ride because they think it's necessary in terms of building your constituency. So ultimately, yeah, fuck it, fine. I think they're all right. What do you think, Aaron?
I think they're fine. I don't think they're dangerous. And again, it's about you need to have.
Also at this point, they're very useful. Yeah, they're an important part of the Labour Party.
Yeah, it's like John McDonnell yesterday was. People say, James Cleverly said there's a picture of John McDonnell with Joe Swinson and the Greens and with Plaid. Why not? I mean, he's the shadow chancellor. It's not Jeremy Corbyn, and I think it is useful for Labour to have a foot in not all camps because obviously it's not going to be doing the exact same thing with the Brexit Party or the Conservatives. But it's important. It is a broad party and it does encompass lots of people with different opinions. And it's driven primarily now by the desire to create a socialist economy, to profoundly shift power in this country towards working class people. So because of that greater goal, that greater objective, of course, I'm very happy to have people like that in Labour. And I don't think they're in any way saboteurs or, trying to undermine the leadership. There are people like that in the Labour Party, MPs.
But the whole point they created that group was to say that we aren't the saboteurs, that we are the people who want to stay in the EU, not just as a reason to bash Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
These are two questions which are quite related. So Jack Murphy, what should Labour's strategy be in the event of no deal? And JG asks, that was the last question. And Pat H asks, do you think current no deal showdown has killed Lexit dead? Even if no deal was averted by a Corbyn government, there would be little taste for another retry at Lexit. And I think the reason they're related is because if we do get to no deal, so it's quite possible, one quite likely outcome is that we end up in a no deal situation and there's a general election and Labour win that general election, in which case we've left the European Union, the future status of Britain's relationship with the EU is completely up in the air. And one option then is Labour just say, look, the way we end this, because presumably there will be economic difficulties at that point, they say that the way we end these economic difficulties is we basically agree to something a lot like May's withdrawal agreement, or even we agree to something which is basically staying in the single market and the customs union, so an incredibly soft Brexit. The other option is there are people within the Labour leadership who say, look, now we've left, we might as well give Lexit a go, because you're actually going to have a lot of leeway at that point. You've already left. The Remain movement is going to be somewhat dampened. And how are you going to best take advantage of that? I think most likely they'll go for the soft Brexit, single market, customs union option, because I think at that moment in time, what people are going to want is a quick solution to what might be a political
we would just join the
crisis.
we would do the Blaise Streeting thing of just joining the EEA, which probably isn't very clever, but there you go. And I also think, look, Lexit's an important, because I was like, Aaron Bastani, he's Lexit. I've never ever said, if you can look at everything I wrote, everything for his, maybe people can feel free to research this. The reason why in the end I backed Remain was because it became increasingly clear towards the end of the campaign that people like Nigel Farage, etc., wanted us out of the single market, out of the ECJ, out of the HRC. And that's, I don't think that's a viable path for left to pursue. Look at Emmanuel Wallerstein, world systems theory. Global capitalism functions with a hegemon. If we were to leave the European Union with no deal, we would become a corollary of US empire very quickly. So I don't think that vision of Lexit works. What I was proposing was effectively leaving the European Union, having one foot in, one foot out, not being part of what they want to do on foreign policy, not being part of what they want to do on external trade and aid, but being in something like EFTA. That's what I was hoping for. And also creating a real shock to the system, so that...
Which did happen, it's fair to say.
Well, no, but now you could argue that the EU's healthier than ever, right? It's got you've got the left and Greens are doing pretty well in the European Parliament. The sort of the sovereign debt crises are kind of dampening down a little bit. So, that's what I was arguing. So I think the idea that anybody who said there was a left argument to leave the EU, they all think the same thing, I don't think is necessarily true. I also do agree, however, that it does create massive opportunities. If you were to leave, it does mean you could nationalise entire industries very quickly. And that is clearly going to be a more appealing thing than the pressure would then be if we did have no deal. The pressure would then be, I think, those people, Jess Phillips and Wes Streeting, would immediately say, let's just join the EEA. I don't think that would necessarily be a wise thing to do. I think there would be scope to examine, rapid renationalisation of industry.
You'd have to do it quickly, though, right?
Well, I say...
Because the whole point is, I think people are going to want a quick solution to this because it's gone on for so bloody
And I also
long.
just think it wouldn't... even though I just don't think it would be likely because, like I say, world systems theory, we operate within a hegemonic world system, the global hegemon, the military hegemon, but also to an extent economic hegemon in the Western Hemisphere is the US. There's also China. So, Britain could never operate, in a manner which was independent of the great powers. It can't do that.
Daniel Pete asks, will a no-deal Brexit fuel IRA terrorism? We've actually done a show on this called No Irish Borders. It was from earlier in the year with a couple of great guests, so you can check that out. I think it won't fuel IRA terrorism because the IRA are disbanded. And I don't think anyone's suggesting it will launch or relaunch the Troubles. The IRA isn't going to... It was a massive popular movement. I don't think there is a popular desire for that kind of thing in Northern Ireland at the moment. The risk is that you have a small number of dissidents who sort of use this as an opportunity for attacks on the border, isn't it? To an extent, I think... I'm not an expert on this. My suspicion is that this is a serious... Well, the idea of threatening the peace process is incredibly serious and should be taken seriously. But at the same time, I think it has been used by some Remainers to... scaremonger's a strong word, but I think it has been overplayed, the extent to which if we have a hard Brexit, suddenly the Troubles will reappear. I think if you don't have a large section of a population that want a violent struggle, it's probably not going to happen. And I don't think a no-deal Brexit is going to make suddenly a large proportion of people in Northern Ireland want to have
but you can still
that
have,
kind of
you can have,
popular
like
struggle.
you said, you can still have really screwed up stuff, right? So there was the IRA, that was an outgrowth of a mass national Republican struggle. But look at the Weatherman Underground in the US. Look at the Red Brigades in Italy. You can still have, if 30 or 40 people want to create mayhem, blow shit up, kill military targets, etc., they can do that. And that could return. It could. There is,
but that couldn't return because that's a completely different thing.
The
That's
real
the whole point.
IRA.
That wouldn't be returning.
No, I'm saying that
could occur.
Well, no, we've not had that in We've not had that in I was going to say we're not in mainland Europe. We've not had that in Europe really, with the exception of ETA. Even again, ETA's as a mass.
That's a mass movement. Yeah, that's not because
we've not really had that in Europe since the 70s. The idea of small cells of people acting like that. Red Brigades, Red Army faction in Germany are the two best examples, really. That could definitely happen, but it wouldn't be like you said. It's not the re-emergence of the IRA prior to the Good Friday Agreement.
Julian Hoare asks, will the Labour right blame Jezza for a no-deal Brexit? Will the Labour right blame Jezza for a no-deal opportunistically, and is the Pope a Catholic?
Yeah, so what? They will, of course they will.
Yeah.
But the great thing about the Labour right is that they're led by, they're sort of their standard bearers, Tom Watson. So that's the great thing about them.
You said it earlier. I don't feel like they're going to be... Well, the biggest problem with the Labour right is if we enter government, and also I think they do... It's the amount of media coverage they get, which I think does have a tendency to undermine our electoral chances. There was always a dictum in politics that divided parties never win elections. And I think that's less true than it used to be, but it also still carries some weight at this point. And the fact that you are going to have all these people out in the press all the time, sort of blaming Jeremy Corbyn's lacklustre performance is going to be a bit of a problem. But
deselection. I went to Birmingham Transformed. 300 tickets were sold a few weeks ago. I'm blocked by her on Twitter, but I'm told by all accounts that Jess Phillips' rhetoric has been rather effusive and positive towards Jeremy Corbyn since then. So, I think that will be a bit of a reality check for a lot of people.
That's true, actually. Well, unless because that would be before a general. I suppose the problem is there is a moment right now
Yeah.
where MPs are particularly worried about
Yeah.
the reselection process because it will be coming up
Yeah.
potentially in September and
Yeah.
October. So if you were to ever see the Labour right cool down and sort of start to speak a bit more positively about Jeremy Corbyn, it would be right now.
Yeah.
But potentially, if either they get reselected, or as in like they get to continue to be the Labour candidate, or there's a snap election so they get automatically reselected, you might see them starting to cause a bit of trouble again. So what you're witnessing over this month and next month isn't necessarily going to be
No.
how they behave over the long
That's true.
term.
But I do think, if we did get mandatory selection, that would become the norm, which is what I would absolutely campaign for.
Absolutely. Oof. Should we give it a break?
Was in finish.
Yeah. Give
Yeah,
it
it's been a good
rest.
show, actually.
Yeah. I like having those questions the whole way through, actually.
Should we just
They're
do it?
always good.
Is that what you want to do?
No. Anything else you want to say?
No, that's great.
Yeah?
Somebody said, are you upset that I've pirated your book? Should I feel bad? Subscribe to Novara Media and we'll call it
Good
quits.
point.
We'll call it quits. I'd say for as little as £1 a month. I'm not going to say that. If you can subscribe for £10 a month, great. But given the book only costs like 12 quid, then, you've lost that, haven't you? So
I think this is
subscribe.
also one of the highest numbers of viewers we've ever had live. It went up to about 1,800 at one point. So presumably at some point in this political crisis, before we leave the EU, if we leave the EU, we need to get up to 2,000.
3,000.
Yeah, let's be ambitious.
If there's if the Boris Johnson government falls, it would be huge, right? Because let's be real, what you're watching right now is a lot better than most stuff that passes for political journalism on television. And that's not me, being, gushing with praise for Michael. It partly is that, but also it's because the legacy media is generally appalling. And that's why we need to build something better.
Which is why you need to go to support.novaramedia.com, which you've just said.
Yeah.
Please like this video. Please share it. Keep your comments coming. Well, not anymore because we're over. But next time we're on, we love them.
Or the newsletter.
And the newsletter. So tomorrow is Thursday, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tomorrow will be the first time that you can get in your inboxes Ash's newsletter, The Cortado. So to sign up for that, I think you go to novara.media/The Cortado. But if that's not correct, Gary is going to put it in the comment section right now. It might even come up on screen. And by next week, I will definitely have it imprinted into my brain what the precise URL is for Ash's newsletter. It is something not to be mixed. We'll see you same time, same place.
Oh, wait. Somebody
What?
said, Aaron, respond to Philosophy Tube's video, please. That will happen.
That's going to happen in a video itself, right?
I want to interview him, but I know he's quite busy, obviously, with this Shakespeare thing.
Sick. Good night.